a while ago, a chap called Felix asked if I could recreate this Photoshop tutorial in Affinity Photo. And believe me, it really does need a sort of an adaptation, because although this is a very good end result and a very good sort of tutorial, there is no commentary. There's not even written help, pointers to say what is going on. There is an awful lot going on. There's lots of layers and lots of chopping and changing between layers, and as those layers aren't named or in any way, it is quite hard to actually follow what is going on, even when you slow it down. So I can guarantee I have missed some steps because it is not that easy to follow. I've done the best I can. Now in this image they've got 7 footballers. I've just done this one with 5 footballers. You don't necessarily have to stick to football, you could use whichever one you want. So this is sort of roughly the end result that I'm going for. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to reset everything and then I will come back. I do want to just point out that I will be adding links to this Photoshop tutorial in the description for the tutorial I'm making, and also there will be links to any of the images that I'm going to use, except for the players images, because they were supplied to me by Felix. It is of his own Swedish 4th division side, which I'm not going to try and pronounce, but you would have to just find your own sportsman images and use them in whatever way you want in your particular project. So like I said, I'm just going to reset things and I'll be back in a little bit. Right, so taking a look at the images that I'm going to use in this tutorial, we have 3 which I got from Pixabay.com. The first one being the stadium. Now for this particular image, or whatever image you're going to use, it is a good idea to have this sort of, you can see at the top of the stadium and you can see the sky above, because we're going to replace the sky with a much more dramatic looking sky. So this is the second image, and there's also some particles that are coming towards the screen. So these are the three images that there will be links to. As I said, they all come from Pixabay.com. Now, to be perfectly honest, the actual stadium sky and images are not necessarily that important to the end result, because if we go back to this image here, like even here you can't really see especially the stadium in the background. You can see a bit of the sky effect up here, and on the version that I made, I had a similar sort of problem. In the end I couldn't really see the background, so it wasn't necessarily, in my opinion, that important what was in the background. But I will go over the procedures of what went on in this tutorial, and you can sort of work out how much of the background you want to be visible. And then we have the 5 players, which, like I said, Felix supplied, and luckily for me, he'd already cut them out and they're already PNG files, so that will save me a lot of time. But if you're going to use your own images, you will just have to cut out your particular players and use them as and when you need them. So let us start the tutorial properly. So we need a new document, and we need it to be wider than it is higher. So I'm going to make this 6,000 pixels by 3,000 pixels, and I'm going to take this tick out of portrait so we get it in landscape size, and this is going to be the main document. So the first thing I need to do is to bring in the first player that I want to use, which is going to be This is the chap that I want to be at the front of the group of players. So I'm just going to right click on that layer, come to copy, come to our document, and then edit and paste him in. Now I'm going to come to the move tool, and I'm just going to resize this to this sort of size that I want him to be. So let's go with maybe that about there. In fact, this might be easier just to center this that way. There we go. So I know he's in the center roughly, although that's more the center of the actual overall image, but I'm happy with where that is. Now it might be easier to rename these as you do them, just so you can keep track of who you are and which layer you're going to be clicking on. As I don't know his name, I know it's listed up here somewhere, but I'm not going to try and pronounce that, so I've just called it Player 1. Now it's a good idea to rename your layers as you go along, because there's going to be a lot of chopping and changing, and it's easier to find them if you've renamed them. Right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete the original of that one, as I don't need that one anymore. Come on to the next player, and we're just going to repeat the process. And then it's a case of just pasting in each person. Now you're going to, obviously you want this person you have in the first position in the front of this section. So I'm just going to click and drag this player down. Let me rename that one Player 2. And then I'm going to resize this, holding down the control key as I do so. And the guideline I've gone by, I don't know quite whether this is quite right, but what I've been doing is getting their head size is roughly the same size. If you're going to sort of go backwards, they should probably start getting slightly smaller, but that is how I've done this anyway. So it's just a case of finding a position that you like for each player. So I'm just going to bring this one down slightly. Right, so that's that one. Let me get rid of this one. On to the next one. That way. And as I've got this player highlighted here, it will put that above this player but below Player 1. So again, like before, I will make the head size roughly the same as the person in front, just so they're all sort of, that's roughly about the same size. So then, like I said, it's just a case of finding a position that you like. Just have him slightly lower than that chap there. Yeah, that's okay. So let me rename this one Player 3. Right, so I can get rid of this one now. And coming up to this chap here, copy and paste. And then it is also a case of whether you like this player, for example, to be in front of the player behind, because his arm is sort of in the way of it there. So if I just click and drag this down, so he's now at the bottom. Yeah, I think that's better because his arm is now not so visible there. So now I can copy and paste this one I've got here in memory. So again, I'll bring him over, resize so the head is roughly the same size. Yes, that's about right. So again, I'm going to want this bloke at the back. Let's bring him down, rename him. Right, so let's put him about there. Now in this case we have his hand going across the back here, which I don't want. You could either do this with a layer mask, but what I will do is I'll just use the eraser brush and I'll just erase off that bit of his arm, because we don't really need to see that. It'll come off that tool, so I don't erase anything else by mistake. So we can now close that image and come with our last image, which is this one. Edit and paste. So like before, getting the head size roughly the same. Yeah. Right, and it's a case of finding the position for him that I like. Right. Yeah, I think that will do for that one. I'll just rename this one. Right, so we now have the 5 players, and set them in the position and proportions at how I like them. What I am going to do now is I'm going to click on the top player, which is my player 1 here, and press the select button and click on the bottom one so they all select, and then I'm just going to group them together. So now if I do want to move them and reposition them slightly, I have that option, because they are now all staying where they were. But just for the, let me just center it just to make sure they're all centered. There we go. Right. Right, so next we want, let me just cut that picture down. We want the stadium image. So I'm going to right click that, copy it, and paste it in. And I want this at the bottom, so I'll click and drag that layer down below the player group, and then hold down the control key to resize so it keeps proportion. And what we want is, say, for the roof of the stadium, to give us some room up here so we can put in the sky. So that is okay, I think. Let me just get those 2 screens centered. So not that you probably end up seeing these 2 screens, but they are centered. So I'm happy with that one. The next we want to get rid of this sky area that is at the top here. So you need the freehand selection tool, which probably is by default set to the rectangular marquee tool. So you just need to open the menu, come to the freehand selection tool, and come to the polygonal button. Click on here, make sure it's on add, and just start somewhere right close to the edge here, and at the top of the roof of the stadium, just click once and then drag down to sort of somewhere in the center of this chap's face. Click again there, and then find the next area there to come to, and then come to the, you can come outside the image, and you can stay outside the image when you click these next bits. Come down and then come back to where you started, just click on that, and it will join all of those together, and we can now just press the delete key on the keyboard. I think there is also a delete option in one of the menus, I can't remember, but it's just easier to press the delete key, and that will get rid of the top half of that image. So we can now press Control and D to get rid of the selection area. Now if I'd had a transparent background, this would all be transparent at the moment. So you can then open the sky image. We don't need the stadium image anymore. Let me get rid of that. So we have the sky image here. So again, I'm going to copy this and edit and paste this in. Come to the move tool and then resize, like so. Alright, and then I'm going to drag this layer down so it's behind the first one. And in this case of just moving it until you get a nice dramatic effect. And what I will do is change that to black and white. And then you can just sort of tinker with some of those settings to get an even more dramatic effect. Alright, and then I'll merge that in to that background layer. Right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to duplicate this sky layer, and I'm going to move it back above the stadium layer, and then I'm going to add a layer mask, which is this key icon here, and then I'm going to come to the paintbrush tool, and I'm going to have a fairly large brush here. Let's start off with an opacity of around the 50% mark, hardness is 0, and black is the colour, and I'm just going to paint at the bottom half here to bring back the stadium, coming close to the roof. So you pretty much want all of the bottom half of the stadium back to be where it was at, 100% opacity. And what the chap did in the Photoshop tutorial, he just left a, I don't know quite why, but he left a quite, didn't go right to the top of the stadium, just sort of left a sort of it looking a bit hazy, and with the clouds sort of just looking like they're billowing over the top of the stadium. So I will leave it at that. It's just giving that top of the stadium a sort of slightly hazy look. Let me come off this tool a second. Now what I will do here is I will rename some of these layers so I know what they are. So I'll call this one Sky Back Image. I'll call this one Stadium, and this one it's got to be Sky Front Group. So let's move on to the next. So what I want to do now is I'm going to highlight the player group. Let me just rename players. and I'm going to just hide them for a minute, and then I'm going to come back down and highlight the top layer below that player group, and I'm going to right click and merge visible. So don't do this until you're happy with how your particular background looks. And it is to this layer that we're going to add a gradient. So you just come to the gradient tool, which is this one over here, and the type we're going to select is radial, and it should automatically just add a radial gradient on this layer. And I'm going to leave white as the center, and I'm going to change the color of the outside. Just click on the node and then double click into the color option up here and just come down to black and close that down, and then it's just a case of lowering the opacity of this layer down, just so you've got that sort of glow in the middle and a darker outside edge. This is like when you're already starting to lose a lot of the background already, and we're going to make it even darker still. So this is what I mean about the background not being 100% important, but I've got that at about 36%, so I'm happy with that. Let me come off that tool a second. So moving on to the next step. So I can bring back the player group, but I will re-highlight the, let me rename that one gradient. I'm going to highlight the gradient layer, and I'm going to add a layer above that but below the players, and then I'm going to select my brush tool, and the brush I'm going to select is a smoke brush. Now I downloaded these in version 3 of the sports posters, and there is a link to it there, but I will add a link if I can find it again for these brushes. And it's quite big. Let's change the color to white. There you go. And it's just a case of adding a bit of smoke and drama. Let's try a different brush for this side. Let's have it down there. And let's try another one. Let's try that one. There, and then one last one. Let's try him and add this about there, I think. So we just have that billowing cloud behind the players there. So let me rename this one Smoke. And what I will do is just lower the opacity of this, just so let's go down to about 50%, so it's not so bright, and you're just getting that billowing effect. It also adds a bit to the sky there at the moment, but maybe 50% is a bit too low. Let me come back up to 60. Yeah, I'll leave that on 60%. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add another layer above this smoke layer. Let me just rename this one sort of smoke 2, and I'm going to change the brush back to a basic brush. Just go with a soft brush here. Again, the color is still on white, I'm going to lower the opacity right down to 0, the hardness should say, and the opacity I will just lower that down to about 50% or so, and then it's just a case of resizing. I'm going to make this quite big, and I'm just going to sort of making sure I'm definitely on this layer I've just made. Just going to paint behind the players just to fill in around them, not touching the outside smoke areas, just making the center of this area around them more solid and less see-through, if you see what I mean. Yes, I'm happy with that. Right, then I'm going to add another layer, and I'm just going to rename this Smoke 3. And on this layer I'm just going to paint around the center area behind the, say, these 3 main players in the center here. I will just reduce the opacity down to about 50%, just to sort of make this the brightest area of all, just to make sure that that area is covered. It's like that. And then I'm going to highlight all 3 of those smoke layers and group them together, and just call that whole group smoke. Right, I'm then going to highlight the player group, and I'm going to add an HSL adjustment, and I'm going to drag this adjustment into the player group. So I'll just click on the icon, drag it down so that it is inside the player group, and then I'm going to reduce the opacity down to about -35, -36, that will do, just to knock some of the colour out of the players and hopefully bring them a bit more better blended in to the background area. Now, it was at this point in the Photoshop tutorial where the chap went on to sort of individually pick on each of the players that he had done, and he added shadows, highlights, probably dodged and burned a bit maybe, and generally worked a little bit on each player individually, which is not something I'm going to do, but if you want to, I suggest you watch that video and maybe try and work out what it is he is doing exactly. Another thing he did was, I don't know why he did this, but on the Chelsea players strip he took off the sponsorship and the badge using the clone tool. Why I only did it to the one player, not the others, I've no idea, but again, I am not going to do that. So let me just close that group, and then we can carry on. So now I want the layer below the players, so that is the smoke layer, and we're going to add a curves adjustment to this. So come down to adjustment icon and come to curves. Let me come off this tool a second. So what we want here is to make the whites a bit whiter and the blacks a bit blacker. So I'm going to just put a center point here and then click and drag down the lower half just to make those darks a bit darker, and maybe just move that top half up so it's a bit more contrasty in the background. It's not something I can say, yes, put it here, put it there. It's a judgment call on your particular picture and how you want it to look. So I will close that. I'm then going to add a lens filter adjustment. So that's lens filter there. It starts off with a yellowy colour, so I'll just click inside there and pick a dark blue colour. And maybe increase that opacity. Let's go up to about 75% on that one. Let's give that an overall blue tinge in the background. Right, next thing we want to do is to highlight the layer below the smoke layer, so in my case this is gradient, and add a new layer to there, and I'm just going to rename this one shadows, and come to the paintbrush tool. This time I want it to be black. I'm going to reduce the opacity down to around the 30% mark, 32, that's close enough, 0 hardness, and it's just a case of painting around the edges and making it all darker. And how dark you make this is again a judgment call. If you want to try and keep some of that sky effect and be able to see the stadium, then don't go too mad with this. It's again, it's a judgment call. Okay, don't forget to go behind the cloud a bit to help accentuate those clouds. Right, so I think that will do, because I want to keep some of that sky effect there. It's just maybe really the corners that I could make darker than anywhere else. Let's take all the light from the corners. There we go. Right, happy with that so far. And next we want to do is to highlight the top layer, which is the players, and I'm going to add a new layer to this. I don't know, I'll leave it unnamed at the moment. Paintbrush tool, this time we want the white brush, and just make sure that is on white. I have a vague feeling it looks a bit creamy. No, it is white. Right, so what we're going to do here, I'm going to reduce the size of this, and I'm going to increase the opacity, let's say around the 50% mark, and I'm going to come to the areas in between the players' heads and just make it big enough so it looks like there's a sort of light shining through between the players. So you've got a bit of light on their faces as well, and probably in and around their heads a bit, just to give it that extra sort of, looks like the light is shining through between the players. So I'm happy with that. Now what I want to do next is to just add a bit of Gaussian blur to this particular layer. So I'm going to come up to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and just leave it on about 2 pixels and click Apply. It's just to help make that layer just that little bit fuzzier. Right, next what I want to do is to highlight the layer below the players, which is in my case is the lens filter adjustment, and this is where I want to open the particle image, and I want this to be black and white, so I'm going to come up to the black and white adjustment, and we can make these a bit brighter. I know these lines were green, so I'm just going to bump up the green so they're a bit brighter, and I'm going to merge that in, and I'm going to right click that, copy, come back to our image here, and then I'm going to paste that layer in, and then I'm going to come to the move tool, resize this so I've got some of those streaks going off the left and the right and the top and the bottom, so it looks like it's sort of coming from the center behind the players, which is okay there. And I'm going to change the blend mode from normal to screen, because screen will get rid of all the black and just leave the white. Now I'm going to reduce the opacity of this because it's a bit too bright, but I'll probably come down to around the 30, somewhere between 30 and 50%. That's 33%, which I'm happy with. And now this would be sort of almost technically the end of the tutorial. I'm a bit concerned about this layer here, which is where these lights between the players, I might have made that a bit too bright, so I'm going to just reduce the opacity of that so it's not so glaringly bright. That's okay. So that would technically be sort of the end of the tutorial, so you could save your image at this point, and hopefully I've made a better job of trying to keep some of that background than I did in my first attempt at doing this. But we can sort of move on and add a bit of text, but let me just save this as I am at this moment so I don't lose it. Right, okay, I have now saved that, and next I'm going to add sort of a bit of text along the bottom here. First I'm going to select the rectangle tool, and I'm going to make the fill, let's go with swatches, we'll make that black, and I'm just going to draw a box across the screen like that, and until I put the text in I won't know about resizing that. So let me come down to the artistic text tool, and I'm just gonna put it up here for now. I'm just gonna draw out a size, and then I've already put this into memory, so I'm just gonna paste this and then open up the site. This is the name of the Swedish football team, which I wasn't going to pronounce, so I'm going to change the color of that to white, or at least I would if I'd highlighted the text first. Let's try that again. Right, and then go to the move tool. I'm going to put that down there with the players and put it about there, so I can come back to the rectangle and just alter its size to fit the text. Right, so and then I'm just going to lower the opacity of this black rectangle down to around 40%. Let's make it 50% so you can still see that across there. And Yes, I think the text is okay being 100% opacity and where that is. So come off all of those tools. So you could maybe fade out the edges, but I'm going to leave the black strip as it is going all the way across like that, just to help highlight the text. So basically that is the end of the tutorial. Just need to save this under a new name. Hopefully Felix is happy with the end result, and thank you for watching, and goodbye.